The following program is a local production of Prairie Public Television.
We just took a quick trip across North Dakota. Unfortunately, getting across the state has never been quite that easy. We're spread out. We have more miles of road per person than any state in the nation. So getting together in North Dakota usually takes some traveling. Shipping the things we produce across the country and the world has also been a challenge. We're in the middle of North America, about as far away as you can get from an ocean. In this program, we'll show you how transportation has affected every step of this state's history, from the introduction of the horse to the Plains Indian, to the railroad's influence in settling North Dakota communities, to getting North Dakota automobiles out of the mud, to innovations in aviation, as we highlight the history of transportation in North Dakota. Living on the Great Plains was difficult for this area's first people. What with the winds, periodic droughts, and cold winters, many of the people stayed in one place, living on agricultural and intertribal trade. Others lived a nomadic lifestyle. Moving around and hunting required much effort. The world changed radically for Native Americans on the northern plains as horses began to appear in the late 1700s. Historians say the first horses were brought to North America by the Spanish. Indians in the Southwest learned how to train and care for horses. They also learned how valuable they could be, and horses became an important item of trade between tribes.
It took the limited mobility of the people and took them to a level of horsemanship that far exceeded many different nationalities, because they became elite in their riding ability and training ability.
They called the horse the holy dog. This holy dog allowed them to hunt buffalo more efficiently.
The Dakotas had specific routes that needed to be covered during a given season, accumulating plants for food, medicine, and also following the buffalo. And so by becoming associated to the horse, that mobility that they got from it enabled them to become wealthy. Wealthy from the perspective that now they had the ability to be able to hunt more productively. They could travel longer distances. And then also they could carry and become beasts of burdens for their teepees. And so their size and number of families increased.
As trade expanded into the Plain States, river transportation was seen as a way to move goods. President Thomas Jefferson began privately scheming to send an expedition up the Missouri River even before France had agreed to sell it to the United States. Jefferson secretly asked Congress for $2,500 to explore the Missouri up to its source and on to the Pacific Ocean. Chosen to head the group were two young Army officers. Meriwether Lewis was a 29-year-old captain in the United States 1st Infantry Division. Lewis himself selected 33-year-old William Clark.
The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and such principal stream of it as by its course in communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean may offer the most direct and practicable water communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce.
The expedition left St. Louis on May 14, 1804, in 3 boats. 5 months later, the party of 43 people passed into what is now North Dakota and traveled on to the Mandan villages where they spent the winter. Fur trader Toussaint Charbonneau joined the expedition as an interpreter in the spring. Charbonneau brought with him his wife, a Shoshone named Sakakawea, Bird Woman, and their young child. Sakakawea proved invaluable when the group passed through her homelands in present-day Montana. Her brother was a Shoshone Indian chief who provided horses and guides for the difficult overland trip to the Columbia River. The expedition followed the Columbia to the Pacific Ocean. For her part in the great adventure, Sakakawea won undying fame with the American public. She has had more memorials dedicated to her than any other American woman. Lewis and Clark's successful expedition up the Missouri turned that waterway into a primary route of travel. The first expedition using steamboats on the Missouri was largely a failure because of the river's shallow water. Even the Western Engineer, which was specially designed for shallow water navigation, was plagued by boilers clogged with mud and sand. U.S. boat builders developed a vessel which became known as the Western River Steamboat. With a flat-bottomed, wide hull and a shallow draft, these boats could successfully haul passengers and freight on the Missouri and other shallow rivers.
Wagons roll!
Initially, the only competition boatmen faced came from overland wagon routes. But the difficulty of hauling by wagon allowed steamboat rates to stay extremely high. When the railroads later offered more dependable transportation at a much lower rate, they essentially forced steamboats out of business. After 1880, Bismarck was the last important steamboat port on the upper Missouri. The transportation of long-distance freight by steamboat on that river ended after 1887, when the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railway reached central Montana. Thereafter, boat operators were only able to serve areas along the river that did not have nearby railroad connections. The last blow for Missouri riverboat operations came with the large dams built along the upper Missouri River in the 1940s. The last boat of any size to navigate the Missouri River headed south in June of 1943. The vehicle around which Red River commerce was first built was a small, two-wheeled, animal-drawn cart made entirely of wood. Red River ox carts were a primary means of moving trade goods in the valley before the railroads came. The carts were made of wood, so they were easily built and just as easily repaired.
The wheels are one of the most important things. You see, these big wheels, you could go up to a stump, and it could be that high, and that old cart would just lift up like this and go right over, see, just like as if it were almost a running. They started using these to go out on the prairie for buffalo hunts. Well, this was a lot better than loading down a pony. You get a couple 100 pounds on a pony. You could put a pony on this and come home with 500-600 pounds of buffalo meat and hides and so forth, you see. And then when the traffic developed, the commerce between St. Paul and Minneapolis with Pembina, that started in the 1840s. Well, my golly, we were carrying goods, thousands of pounds, with hundreds of these carts every year. But we had in the axle here elm rubbing against oak, and we never greased that. Because if we'd grease it, we'd start collecting dirt, and that dirt would just grind like sandpaper, and we'd lose the end of our axle. Fall right off. Now, the sound of squeaking wood was just about the highest kind of
all day long. Now, if you can imagine several hundred carts like that, then you'll understand why I sang all the time.
The carts were quickly adopted by one particular segment of the Red River people, the Métis, or mixed bloods. These people formed a population separate from both European settlers and Native Americans. They lived primarily by annual or semi-annual expeditions to the prairies in search of the herds of buffalo. Often the entire Métis community took part in these hunts.
The nose of the ox or the pony would be about, I'd say maybe about that far behind the basket of the one right in front. Maybe sometimes the horns then would be laced like that with leather straps, and that would be tied to the basket in front. And you'd get 10 like that, 10 ponies or oxen in one row tied to each other. And you'd get 3 drivers. And then you had dozens of those, what we call brigades of 10. And the captain on a horse that would go side by side, you see, like that. They'd start leaving, as I was saying, in the morning from the place, and sometimes they hadn't all gone by the next morning.
By 1871, track layers reached the Red River at both Moorhead and Breckenridge, and the day of the ox cart was at an end. The carts disappeared quickly thereafter, many of them being used simply to feed a trailside campfire or warm a cabin. Commercial boat operations began on the Red River of the North in 1859 as part of an effort to create a better transportation route connecting St. Paul, Minnesota with the Red River settlements in present-day Manitoba. The Hudson's Bay Company had sent a trial shipment of trade goods from Great Britain via St. Paul to Manitoba. The venture was a success. That led the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce to offer $1,000 to the first man who would place a steamboat on the Red River of North Dakota. This caught the interest of young Anson Northup, who was then operating a small steamer called the North Star on the Mississippi. When Northup got the chamber to double the offer, he was off and running. Northup christened his new steamer, modestly, the Anson Northup, in May of 1859. It arrived in June at the site of present-day Winnipeg, cordially welcomed by the boom of Fort Garry's cannon and the bells of St. Boniface's Cathedral. Twice a week, stagecoaches left St. Paul at dawn for a jolting 4-day run to Fort Abercrombie. There, passengers changed to the steamboat. Accommodations on the Anson Northup were scarcely regal, as one captain remembers it.
Nothing better than a lumbering old pine basket, which you have to handle as gingerly as a hamper of eggs.
The Red River was not an easy place on which to operate steamboats. For one thing, it was extremely shallow in the south. It also tended to wind back and forth across the prairie.
Lest I be misunderstood, I hasten to say that north is its general course. Its particular course is that of a reluctant and homesick pig driven on a straight road to market. So that although by land from Breckenridge to Winnipeg is but 275 miles, the estimated distance by water is 750 miles.
Circumstances were rapidly changing with the approach of the railroads. On December 9, 1878, the first train from the south, made up of some flat cars, 1 passenger coach, and 2 cabooses, arrived at St. Boniface. That line essentially ended the long-distance steamboat traffic on the Red River of the North. Railroads played a number of roles in North Dakota's early history. First of all, they were the only dependable means of rapidly moving both people and freight in the United States. Once 2 points were connected by a railroad line, all earlier means of transportation between those points simply could not compete. Railroads had no peer in passenger carrying capacity, or comfort for that matter, or in moving freight. Railroads came into the state in the 1870s as part of the movement to settle the country. The first NP locomotive crossed the Red River into what is now North Dakota in June of 1872. By September of the next year, the line was completed to the Missouri River at present-day Bismarck.
They actually opened up North Dakota as far as development is concerned. The first crossing of the Missouri River was a railroad bridge here in Bismarck. All the small communities developed around railroads. A lot of the names of the towns you see nowadays either were for people that were officials in the railroads, people that worked on railroads, or wives of people that worked on the railroad.
The railroads actively recruited immigrants to settle the area along their tracks. Immigrants from Europe began arriving in earnest in the 1870s. Dakota was the last big pocket of available agricultural land on this continent. In addition, they were attracted by the large populations of their countrymen in surrounding states. The railroads picked up on that attraction. The most active in this effort was the Northern Pacific, in large part because the company had land to sell. Congress granted the NP more than 10 million acres of land in North Dakota alone. That was almost 24% of all land in the state. This land was intended to be sold to finance the construction and operation of the railroad. One of the approaches the NP used was to encourage the formation of colonies of people having similar religious and ethnic backgrounds. Norwegians in particular considered old country loyalties to be important and tended to settle near friends from the same old country provinces. In the late 19th century, the Fort Ransom community considered itself to be divided into the North Norwegians, the South Norwegians, and the Irish, that being anyone who did not speak Norwegian. The Germans from Russia wanted to settle in areas that had enough land for them to form closed communities. Scouts were sent to Ohio and Nebraska, but not enough land was available for them to settle together. The first German-Russian colony settled in this state near Zealand in 1884. The Northern Pacific then began actively promoting settlement of the German-Russians, and in 1885, they began showing up around Hebron, Glen Ullin, and to the north of Mercer County.
This part of North Dakota is mostly settled by Germans, whom the railroad company enticed out there by sending agents to Europe to offer every inducement to get them settled on its lands. After that, the Germans are left to eke out a miserable existence the best way they can. It's almost impossible for them to make both ends meet, owing to the severe winters that prevail in this part of North Dakota.
The presence of these early arrivals encouraged others to settle along the NP route. Other railroads recruited settlers to fill up their boxcars. The Great Northern, Sioux Line, and Milwaukee Road all actively printed advertising and offered special land seeker rates during the spring. Two transcontinental routes going east and west were developed across North Dakota, the Northern Pacific in the southern half of the state and the Great Northern in the north. Branch lines were also being installed. Stations were placed 6 to 10 miles apart because that's how far a farmer with a horse and wagon could haul his grain to an elevator and get home again in one day. North Dakotans depended upon the railroad to bring their commodities to the rest of the world and to bring back the goods they wanted.
It was virtually impossible for people to travel across the state to get into distant cities or traveling across the country any other way but by train, unless they were in a wagon train and they were looking at resettling. So once the railroads were in, they really did become the predominant way of transporting both people and commodities. Virtually everything that moved into and out of the state moved by rail. There were no trucks, there were no hard surface roads. Farmers couldn't load up their horse-drawn cart and take their wheat down to Minneapolis, the nearest major consumption area. So they were dependent on the railroads to get that grain to market and conversely to bring in anything that they couldn't produce on the farm for their own existence.
I remember passenger service in the hometown that I lived in southwest North Dakota, that it was one little passenger car that came into town, and maybe 3 or 4 people would get off of it. But yeah, I remember that. I remember taking cream buckets to the depot and having the train pick it up every so many days. Then you pick up your empties the next time.
Cream, you hold fresh meat, you hold refrigerators, carpet, linoleum, and batteries and tires.
Well, I was working on steam engines. That's all we had at that time, and you were freezing on the backside and roasting on the front side because you were against a hot boiler. When you finished the run with a steam engine, you could wear a pair of gloves maybe 2 days, and you were always black with cold when you got home. You felt like you accomplished something. You did a man's job, and you did a good day's work.
As roads improved and automobiles became more widespread, the popularity of the railroad declined. People became more independent in their travels. They liked having the flexibility to drive where they wanted, when they wanted. Cities started to use trucks to bring in goods because it was more convenient. Railroad lines became less profitable.
A lot of things happened. There were changes in the way that grain was marketed. Back in the early 1900s, we had over 2,000 grain elevators in the state. That number declined until in the 1970s we probably got down into the 700s, and today we have about 485 elevators. So there was consolidations there. We needed fewer elevators, and farmers were trucking their grain longer distances. They went from single axle trucks to tandems to semis, and relatedly we didn't need as many branch lines.
Some of the railroads, to compete, decided that if they had larger cars instead of smaller cars, they could haul less cars and more product. But what that also did is that a lot of the branch lines that we had weren't built to handle those type of cars. So that again was another nail in the coffin on a lot of the branch lines we had in the state.
The number of rail lines in North Dakota started to decline in the 1970s. A couple of railroads declared bankruptcy. This was a wake-up call to the federal government, which moved to deregulate railroads in the 1980s, allowing them more flexibility in what they hauled and what they charged. Services that could not make a profit were likely discontinued. Railroads were also experimenting with unit trains. Shippers were offered discounts for trains of more than 26 cars.
The size of the cars has gotten bigger, and we've seen some railroads go from 50 cars to 75 cars. What's next? 100-car unit trains? Quite possibly. And if that's the case, we're going to see more and more consolidation in the grain elevator industry, and more lines that have less and less traffic. And certainly the railroads have to be profitable in order for them to keep those lines in place. And hopefully that's going to be a rational process, but it's going to have an impact on some communities, and it's certainly going to have an impact on roads, because if you've got that consolidation and concentration, now you've got farmers hauling grain longer distances and bigger trucks and having even more impacts on county roads and state highways.
One innovation that is offering a different variety of rail service to North Dakota communities is the development of regional railroads or short lines. By traveling at a slower speed with smaller crews, the short lines are able to use rail lines that can no longer handle the faster, heavier traffic of the big shippers. Rail lines were also used to move people around within North Dakota cities, an early form of mass transit. The first streetcars were simply hitched to horses. Electric railway cars came to North Dakota in the early 1900s. Fargo's City Electric Rail System was built in 1904. A new line also operated in Grand Forks about the same time to connect the university with downtown. Streetcar lines were also built in Wahpeton and Valley City and talked about in several other North Dakota communities. Most cities west of the Red River Valley were simply too small in population to support an electric trolley line. The single exception was Bismarck, which was home to the only streetcar line known to have been built and operated by a state government. Assuming that Bismarck would grow rapidly, the state capitol building was built in 1883 on a hill a mile north of the business district. But in 1903, getting to work was still a big hike for state employees. That year, the legislature appropriated $20,000 to solve this transportation problem. Problems over funding the line began cropping up in the late teens. The issue was decided at the end of 1930 when the Capitol building burned to the ground. With the Capitol gone, there was no reason for operating the trolley, and the service was discontinued. The railroad brought people to North Dakota, but the automobile allowed them to move around. The railroad could go wherever the tracks were laid. The automobile allowed North Dakotans to go almost anywhere.
One of the elements of the American dream is the concept of freedom. And one of the things that an automobile provides is individual freedom. And so the automobile struck a responsive chord because people could go where they wanted, when they wanted. And so part of what the early automobile builders were doing was living out the American dream in terms of searching for personal freedom.
The first gasoline-burning automobile to appear in North Dakota arrived in Grand Forks in 1897. This German-built car was called a Benz Velo and was used to advertise a brand of cigars.
Many of the people who started building cars around 1900 built them because they couldn't get cars. They weren't available. They were being built, but they couldn't buy them. There was sometimes a delay of a year or two before they would actually get a car. William Newton-Jones lived south of New England, and he built this vehicle out of an old buggy, placed an engine in it, used a belt to provide the power, and he would drive it out to the field, I am told, and take the engine out and pump water with it, and then put the engine back in, connect things up, and drive home. Sometimes they would buy an engine, sometimes they would buy a body, but a lot of times they had to do most of it themselves.
The automobile certainly beats horses for speed and hill climbing and rides easier than any buggy. No more care is required to handle it than to handle a good team of horses. It's almost noiseless and odorless. The only fault that may be found with it is that it can't be run in deep snow, and being open would expose the occupants to the keen winds in winter. But for the rest of the year, it's hard to beat.
By 1904, automobiles were becoming more sophisticated, with more substantial engines and bodies.
In 1904, Samuel Holland, a mechanic in Park River, North Dakota, built this automobile in his machine shop. It is the oldest surviving North Dakota-built automobile currently in the state.
The local paper reported that Holland's car was used winter and summer, and its thorough tests have proven it to be one of the most practical runabouts made.
My brother had a Model T Ford Roadster. Oh, geez, nice one. So I thought one day, I'm going to see if I can get that car started. So I went in there, and it was in the shed, no door on it, but it had a wall on it. So I got the thing going. I'd seen my brother driving it, there. He'd come with his arms sticking out, there, driving right in the shed, stepped on the brakes, and no problem at all, see. So I drove up to the mailbox, which was about 20 rods. Our farm was a little ways away from the road. Drove up there, and I come back, and I drove around the yard, and then I decided, thought I better put it in case somebody should come home, so I put it back in the shed again. Lo and behold, I come driving in the shed with my arms sticking out, there, and stepped on the brake, and there was no brakes on it, because in those days you had to use the reverse. You had to step on the reverse and the brake at the same time and know how to when to quit so it don't fly backwards for you. I didn't do that. I just stepped out of brake and I went right through the building. I come out on the outer side. Oh, boy, did I get hecked that night. And we had a lot of fun with that thing, though. It had little tires on it, you know, about 3.5-inch tires on it, no spare tire. You know, you carried a tire pump with you, and then you carried tire patching along. If you had a flat tire, you fixed it. You stopped on the road and fixed it. They had two levers on it, you know. One regulated the spark and the other one regulated the speed. And if you didn't have that spark lever just right, boy, that crank would go backwards and you'd break your arm just as soon as you were sitting there. And that happened real often with many people. I didn't have it happen to me, but my brother, he broke his arm that way.
The first motorized trucks came to North Dakota in the early 1900s. The arrival of truck transportation played a big role in the growth of the state. Trucks became the workhorse in cities and on the farm. No longer were farms limited to the distance a horse could pull a wagon to the city. But trucks and automobiles still had to contend with bad roads. The push for better roads was on. Early automobile owners simply struck out on their own on existing roads that were little more than cowpaths. Their most common routes followed existing railroad lines. Automobile associations that were organizing across North Dakota were pushing for better roads. They were blazing new roads by sponsoring endurance races. The tour's official route and guidebook included specific driving instructions with odometer figures. 67.3, through Tioga, cross railroad and turn right. Feed barn on left at turn. Follow railroad on right to Temple. 72.7, pass elevator on right, straight through Temple. Pass Adams General Store on left. 73.2, over Bad Stony Hill, railroad on right, keep left at First Fork. 73.7, through Farmyard, greenhouse left. 74.2, railroad tracks right, follow main trail. 75.6, bad hole, look out. 76.1, bad hole, go around. 78.5, pass crossroad and elevators. 78.9, turn right, cross railroad, station on right, Ray. It was the start of the Good Roads movement. County and township governments built and maintained all of the roads in those days. Motorists were lobbying these governments to build new roads and improve existing ones. In 1906, the state engineer reported that of over 59,000 miles of public road in North Dakota, only 205 miles were gravel, and only 7 were stone. He was pushing for a state highway commission.
The problem of the system of highways is one that is almost as important as that of a system of railroads. In fact, it comes more closely home to the average settler and home seeker. More money is wasted in agricultural communities through the breakage of vehicles and the wearing out of horses because of bad roads than in any other way.
Also pushing for a coordinated road system were the trail associations. The first and most important of these to operate in North Dakota was the National Parks Highway Association, which was established in the early teens to promote travel to both Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks. The Red Trail was blazed across North Dakota in 1914. County governments were persuaded to build and maintain the segments of the road located within their boundaries.
Starting early in the dewy freshness of the morning, we left Bismarck, the capital of North Dakota, on the Missouri River over the Red Trail, August 3rd on good dirt roads, making Jamestown 100 miles to the east in time for lunch. The glorious day and our exuberance kept us there only a little over an hour when we were on the way for Valley City on the Cheyenne, 40 more miles distant. What seemed long, barren stretches in the past now are infested by the farmer motorist, who finds his circle has widened with the age of the horseless carriage, and calls his friend who is fully 50 miles distant his neighbor.
State government was now making every effort to improve roads. The 1913 legislature created the state's first State Highway Commission, which was made up of the governor, state engineer, and a third member. The legislature directed the Highway Commission to aid county governments in road and bridge building. A constitutional amendment was proposed to authorize spending state money on road construction, but that was defeated. The legislature did authorize private associations or organizations to improve the public roads at their own expense. After a fundraising campaign, the Red Trail Association paid most of the $20,000 it took to build a narrow bridge in 1916 across the Little Missouri in North Dakota. The federal government entered the road building business in America in 1916. That's the year the Federal Aid Road Act was passed, creating the Bureau of Public Roads, which provided federal aid to states for road construction. The 1917 North Dakota legislature established a new State Highway Commission to administer these funds. The commission would lay out the highway system, establish construction standards, and oversee the construction and maintenance financed with federal funds. This same legislation gave the Highway Commission 2/3 of motor vehicle license fees, which had previously all been going to local governments. The commission laid out primary and secondary roads after consulting with county governments. The roads were numbered, and North Dakota officially had a road system. In 1922, North Dakota had about 1,000 miles of graded roads, though only 20 miles had a gravel surface.
Going to Fargo, that would be about 2 trips a year, and that was a big deal. And my older brother, then he had to grease the car, and he had to wash it and change the oil on it, and just like we're going to go for thousands of miles, you know. And there was a U-turn in Fargo. At that, past the J.C. Penney Company at that time. So my dad come driving along. He was going north, and he decided to turn around and go back on the other side of the street where the dime store was at, Woolworth's dime store. And the policeman hollered to him, this hurricane, "Hey," he said, "you can't do that." "Oh, my dad, I think I make it." He said. He turned around and went back again. He got a scolding, but he didn't get a ticket.
North Dakota's road system developed slowly through the 1920s with a conservative administration that wanted no new taxes when the state was in a financial depression. Another crisis was Governor William Langer's decision to divert motor vehicle registration fees for 3 years. The state's financial rating was enhanced, but there was no money to match federal aid funds, and road construction was crippled.
When I started with the Highway Department in June 1934, practically all of the system was gravel at that time. Now the state highway system is about, at that time was about 9,000 miles, and probably maybe there were only 100 miles of it that was actually paved or hard surfaced at that time. I can remember going out to Medora, and Highway 10 was all gravel from Mandan west. And it just took you all day to go out there and come back. You couldn't go much more than 25 miles an hour, and if there happened to be a culvert out or something, why, you were in bad trouble.
The 1935 legislature required drivers to be licensed and created the North Dakota Highway Patrol. A common violation written by the Highway Patrol in the late 30s was no driver's license. The license law only required drivers to be over 16 and pay a small fee, but it was widely ignored at first. During the 1930s, motorists were demanding open roads to drive on during the entire winter, and the Highway Department in 1932 committed itself to keeping over 2,000 miles of road open. The department bought 11 rotary snow plows to eat through heavily blocked cuts and banks.
The public wanted these roads open, and they weren't streamlined roads like we have today. We used to have to bust through cuts where the snow was 20 feet deep. The trucks weren't big enough to do it, so I had a really heavy A-hitch made so we could push with one behind the plow truck. We finished making that hitch about 2 in the morning, but we took the outfit out to a big drift by Fort Lincoln. We hit that son of a gun wide open and blew it apart. Turned around and widened it out to 20 feet. My God, we had snow piled up there as high as the ceiling.
When plows couldn't open a hard drift, the snow was loosened by dynamite. During World War II, the federal government didn't consider road building to be an essential operation, except for some strategic roads. Federal highway funds were cut drastically. By 1944, the state's highways were in pitiful condition. That year, Congress allocated $1.5 billion to be spent by the states on highways. The only problem was North Dakota had to come up with matching funds. Gas taxes and auto registration fees were increased, income certificates were sold, and for a time, higher education budgets were cut by 1/2 to channel the funds into the highway system. The department adopted a policy of staged construction, getting hard surfaces onto as many miles of state roads as possible. By 1948, highway building had recovered to pre-war volumes and was pushing vigorously upward. The 1956 Highway Act put federal taxes on motor fuel, large trucks, and other road-related items and put in a trust fund. The act also developed the Interstate highway system, which has revolutionized vehicular travel in the United States.
Well, the idea was to move vehicles without interruption and to connect all parts of the country with adequate roads on the connecting by as directly a route as practicable, and without any, and with safety being a major influence in it. As the safety, of course, is manifested by the fact that the interstate system is completely controlled access. In other words, you cannot get on or off the interstate system except at interchange areas.
2 interstate highways were to cross North Dakota. Number 94 would run east and west, mostly replacing U.S. Highway 10. Interstate 29 would run north and south through the Red River Valley and replace US 81.
I think that for the most part, people in North Dakota accepted the fact, and they wanted good roads. North Dakota has, up until World War II and even after World War II, I mean, the system in North Dakota was a pretty sorry mess as far as, you know, we didn't have very many paved roads, and so people were very conscious of the need for good roads. So some of the people resisted it. This fellow had a, let's suppose right here, for example, we decided to put the interstate down this road. He's got a road. He can get on the road any place he wants to. All right. Then we come along, we take 400 feet of right away from him, see, and then he can't get on. He says, here I got the doggone road in front of me. I can't even get on the thing.
In 1957, the segment of I-94 connecting Valley City and Jamestown was opened with both a gala celebration and a comprehensive educational effort to accustom North Dakota drivers to coping with limited access highways. I-94 was completed across the state in 1968. Work on I-29 continued into the 1970s, partly due to the problems of road building on the glacial lake bottom of the Red River Valley. The last segment was dedicated by Governor Arthur Link in 1976.
Interstate, in my mind, put us in not only the national market, but the international market. Particularly in the movement of truck commodities. It became easier to get long-distance freight in and out. It connected us with the rest of the United States.
In addition, special funds coming into the state to build the interstate freed money for other North Dakota highway projects.
We were able then to accelerate the program on the rest of the state highway system. As a matter of fact, by 1965, I think we had all the highway system paved in North Dakota.
Those were the golden days of highway construction. Today, there are 7,400 miles of state highways. The state's highway system is about as big as it's going to get. Future construction projects will, for the most part, be efforts to maintain the current system in its current condition rather than to add new miles.
Well, a few years ago we started to tell that with the existing money that we had in this state and that we could support a system with, we were going to start falling behind. And with roadways, it's not a situation that it's going to fall apart overnight. It's you can almost predict when it's going to happen, but when it does happen, it happens in a hurry. So
North Dakota depends heavily on the trucking industry to move goods in and out of the state. Trucks move 85% of the manufactured goods coming into the state and more than 50% of the goods going out. But like rail cars, trucks have been increasing in number, size, and weight. To accommodate the growing size, North Dakota has adopted federal truck weight limits that exceed the weight limits for which the roads were built. North Dakota will likely be making tough decisions in the future about which roads can be saved.
and we may reach a situation where we're going to have to make some hard decisions on priorities for some of our lesser volume routes. We may just not be able to maintain them as well as we have. We may have to target limited money to more important roads. How you define more important roads, that's probably up for discussion. You could use some things by saying the ones that have the most volume, carry the most freight. In other instances, you might say what type of commodity is more important than another. So you may have a low volume, and somebody may say it's a more important commodity. So it's going to be a difficult call. Hopefully there'll be some things coming around with new technology, possibly new research as far as the type of materials we use in road building. The Federal Department of Transportation has put a large emphasis on research the last several years, and there are some new things coming out with how we can maybe build roads better and how we can make them last longer. Hopefully we can take advantage of that.
Our population in North Dakota is aging, while smaller cities lose services. Many older people must travel to larger communities to see their doctors and to shop. This need has led to the more than 50 transit systems now operating in North Dakota communities. A few are city bus services, but most are small vans and buses that run from smaller communities into the larger cities with stops at shopping centers and hospitals. The challenge for the future will be to maintain these transit systems as rural populations continue to grow older and decrease. When aviation arrived in North Dakota, it was more a public exhibition than a means of transportation. It was show business. The first powered flight came to cheering crowds at the state fairgrounds in Grand Forks on July 19, 1910. A professional pilot for the Wright brothers named Arch Hoxsey made several exhibition flights in a Wright pusher biplane. Exhibition flying was enormously popular, but the number of pilots and aircraft was limited. At the end of World War I, the many North Dakotans trained as pilots in the service took to barnstorming as a way to earn money. A pilot could go barnstorming by buying a war surplus Jenny for a song, flying off to a community, and performing aerial stunts.
Barnstorming was the young gentlemen that came out of the military, majority of them. they could buy trainer planes. They called it Jenny. It was a biplane, large engines, and they just wanted to fly again. And what they did is they just went from town to town and to give rides. And they would do acrobatics, and they would find a farmer's field and they land in. And for $3 a ride, they give you a ride. And then gas cost 17 cents a gallon at that time. So, you know, they subsisted that way. And that created a air show atmosphere. A few of them got together and they became, you know, put a team together and they become air shows, and then they go from town to town.
A university student in Grand Forks named Carl Ben Eilson used his war surplus Jenny trainer to barnstorm area towns after classes to raise school money. Eilson later went on to fame as part of the first flight over the North Pole and as a pioneer of aviation and mail service in Alaska. He died in a plane crash in 1930. After his flight across the Atlantic, Charles Lindbergh came to Fargo as part of an 82-city tour of the U.S. designed to publicize air travel. On August 26th, he landed the Spirit of St. Louis on the old El Zago Golf Course in North Fargo and was treated to a parade and series of ceremonies. The same man who designed Lindbergh's plane built the plane used by a group of Minot men to form the state's first airline. Their plan was to fly a regular passenger route between Minot and Bismarck. The company folded after only a few flights. Other air service attempts failed because of high startup costs and low ridership.
Number one, it was expensive. Number two, people hadn't flown very much, so why would I want to get in an airline? The railroads were providing a pretty good transportation route across the state.
Congress solved the problem by giving small struggling airlines airmail service contracts, which became a sort of government subsidy. This system brought North Dakota its first regularly scheduled airline in 1931, when Northwest Airways extended its route to Winnipeg, flying via Fargo, Grand Forks, and Pembina.
That subsidy gave the airlines the opportunity to reduce the price of the ticket to get the people to fly.
North Dakota now has 98 airports, 8 of those with commercial passenger service. Airlines were deregulated in 1979. Communities that had air service before deregulation and could not sustain it received a federal subsidy. 3 communities, Devils Lake, Jamestown, and Dickinson, still need that subsidy to survive. North Dakota may lose airports in the future, but if the population doesn't shrink, air service should remain strong.
So when you take a look at being in North Dakota and with air service, we're not remote. You know, we can be any place in the United States by noon when we leave on an early morning flight. The challenge is to maintain the population base and maintain the business activity that creates the air travel. For a rural area like North Dakota, in a smaller communities, and some of the directions for economic development that they're dealing with, an airport is a front door to them. If a business wants to come and talk to them, a lot of times they want to come in an airplane like this.
North Dakota is in the right position to become a regional hub for air freight services. Grand Forks already serves as a regional hub for Federal Express. The Aerospace Center at the University of North Dakota may spawn other ideas on how North Dakota can be part of the world's aviation future. Our dependence on transportation is not going to change. In fact, if we're going to improve our economy, we'll want fast and efficient methods to ship more North Dakota-produced goods out of state.
Well, North Dakota is about as far as you can get from everything. We're in the middle of the North American continent. We're in the middle of the United States as far as east-west. all the export markets and everything major are a long distance from here. You still have to get to some points. I mean, regardless if you have one farmstead in one area, you still may have school children to move out of there, you still may have milk from a dairy operation, or you may have an ag product you have to move. I mean, you still have to have a facility into that area. Transportation, I think it's always going to have to be important to North Dakota.
The tough decisions North Dakotans made in the past have shaped the great transportation system we benefit from today. The decisions we make today and tomorrow will affect us for generations.